Hi, I'm Bronwyn Hayward. We started a little late, so I hope, if you don't mind, we're just going to run for 5 minutes. Now I've been trained how to do these 5-minute talks. You'll notice one thing that's different about this forum and this discussion tonight is it's tentative this afternoon. It's tentative, and we need to think about why we make it so hard for younger or different voices to speak. But what I want to talk very quickly in summary about are the four, is a kind of an arch for the climate that we have created for our children and those that follow. We've talked a lot about dangerous environmental change, and that's certainly one of the major factors of this climate. But as the speakers spoke, this climate is also an economic climate of unprecedented youth unemployment. The UNICEF image of 2 girls from Tunisia, we estimate now for work, if you're 13 in Tunisia, to even have a job to apply for, we'll have to create 6.5 million new jobs every year for the next 10 years for that 13-year-old today to have work when she's 23. So youth unemployment is a major issue for half the world who is under the age of 25. So too is growing social inequality as all of our communities wrestle with the gap between rich and poor. And so is a weakening democracy as communities are struggling to hold financial global power to account. So those are the overarching challenges, but each generation and each community faces its own. For me, where I come from in Christchurch, my challenge has been 59 earthquakes in the last 2 years over magnitude 5. This is just down the road. And on top of that, there's been the cascade. So childhood is a life on a dynamic planet. But then this summer, we had firestorms around the edge of town. And then today and tonight, we've got flooding and snow. And for those from Wellington, the worst storm in our history. And we have thousands without homes. But an earthquake, we don't need to wait for the catastrophes to think differently. And the one fantastic thing about living through a disaster that's your own, even when it's small and provincial, is that it lets you think differently. This is a refrigerator created by our students, and they're put on public spaces because they're all damaged and they all fell over. And they're filled up with books because we lost our libraries, and it was reclaiming this idea of the public connection. But we also began to think very differently about social agency, about how we collaborate, and that was led by our young citizens. So Sam Johnson, one of the students in Christchurch, overnight after the first earthquake, he had an internet connection. Not a lot of people did, but he, as a theatre student, which is also important, as a communicator and a theatre student, organised 100 students to respond the next day to the elderly in the mud. By the end of the February really serious earthquake, they were coordinating 24,000 students, 10,000 on the ground, in working parties of 10 to 100, and that's carried on as a trust, and it just began from nothing. And we've also seen a whole range of new experiments because transition or change happens small. Some of the most interesting and exciting new ways of thinking have happened in tiny spaces, creating new kinds of work-rich, low-carbon employment in the creative, the caring and the craft industries, as my colleague Tim Jackson argues. We've created spaces for public connection. This was last week, of new market spaces, new performance spaces, new art spaces, and now empty spaces. We've created greening the rubble and community gardens, because what do you do with all of this space? And memorials have sprung up everywhere for those who've died, but especially what we just do is put flowers and cones all over the place. So when a community starts to get organised at the grassroots like this, we need your support. We need to be connecting out. And that's what this generation is doing very well from Taksim Square to Brazil at the moment is connecting. But when that starts to happen, it is very threatening, because these new ideas about what a new economy might look like, how we might make it work, they're not just going to happen. So in our little microcosm case study, government is closed down, they're replanning the city in 100 days, there's no local government, the community's in protest. It won't happen easily, but it will happen. We talked about the 10,000, you only need 10% of a community to change a population. We know that's true. But what really struck me with the British riots and protests that Joe talked about, being there outside Parliament and thinking just before this whole sea change of youth protest started, what kinds of democracies are we creating that feel that they need to protect themselves from the legitimate demands of communities? And the argument I want to make to the climate change community is youth are engaged with the fundamental drivers of climate change. We are not engaged with them. And we need to move our conversations, and we need to do it quickly, because a rebel is not a citizenry. And we need to make these arguments, and we need to support and stand beside our young people. At home, we're 120 years, like Norway today is, this year is 100 years for women having the vote. And in my city, in Christchurch, it was the first city that gave women the vote and the first country in the world 120 years ago this year. So we salute Norway. But also, as Hannah Arendt reminds us, every human action has the natality, the potential for something new. And here in Norway, we thought and listened to Norway, we listened to how you responded to the terrible situations of the 22nd of July with such relief. Norway's strength and its calmness changed a public mood. In the Pacific, our communities are not sad. They are fighting, and they are strategic about what they're thinking, right down to Brianna Fruin, who is 14 years old, who's organised enormous rallies of communities all over Samoa, but she's not alone. And she shouldn't be. This is from Occupy Vancouver. It is important. We, the baby boom generation, made this situation. We have to stand with our children going forward. This cannot be something that we leave to them. So, where to next? One small step as academics is to ask, what is it that are the priorities for Norway? Every country says we're too small, we're too big, we've got too many things. Norway is a powerful influence. Its sovereign fund is a powerful, different model for managing wealth and for managing oil. It matters what happens next in Norway. It matters very much to my country. People say, why are there so many Australasians here? It's because we are watching. The world is really watching. And we would like to know what it is that matters for young Norwegians. And if you're young at heart, please, we would still like to hear from you. And if you don't want to take part here, a suggestion from a colleague who, Maya from the Social Justice, is go out and talk to one person who is very different from yourself, much older, much younger, a completely different language, and ask them, what is their vision for a good way to live? And as Havel says, let's begin living as if the hope that we want to see in the world has come about. Thank you. And thank you.